I'd like to talk with you about the intersection of Creative Avenue and Business Boulevard. But before we get into that, I'd like to ask a couple rhetorical questions. For the business folks out there, how many times have you walked over to Creative, there's a project to check on the status of a project, and then you get an earful of attitude? Or you find out that the project is woefully behind schedule. Or on the flip side, creative folks, how many times have you found out that the suits overpromised to a client, so they set unrealistic expectations and unrealistic deadlines? It's scenarios like this that kind of make you, hit yourself in the head and say, oh, brother. And the other day I was talking to my friend Jerry about this topic, and he said, well, you really need to avoid the classic dichotomy between the two groups and assigning labels of suits versus creatives. And sure, okay, I agree that an us versus them mentality probably isn't the best thing. But the reality for all of us who are working in agencies and in marketing companies is that business teams and creative teams, oftentimes, they conflict. And Andrew Jaffe, in his book, Casting for Big Ideas, he talks about how we, as advertising agencies, we as marketers, need to employ a new set of skills and new techniques to really innovate and really impact brands in a positive way through really great marketing thought. And it's with that common goal in mind that I'd like to talk about the two groups here, the business and creative teams. I'd like to discuss some common problems and then also some tips for success in successful communications. And so who is it that we're really talking about here? Well, first we've got the creatives, rawr, right? And, we got the Godzilla, and he's smashing the city. And, this is creative directors and art directors, motion graphic designers, copywriters, and so on. And so on the other side, we've got the suits. And, oh, look, we got the guy, and he's got his little briefcase there, and he's watching the clock. And, they're also known as the business folks, as I like to call them. And this is our clients. This is account supervisors, project managers, pretty much anyone who's not a creative. And so, we ask the question, what is this Creative Avenue? In Creative Avenue, it's this part of a project where, on the creative side, it's this mental state of mind where you're really focusing on a project. We've got some great brainstorming, and we've created these great concepts. A couple years ago, I was working on an account for Kia, and we kind of went down this road. And you know how when you go to a dealership, everybody likes to do as much research as possible. You want to arm yourself with all this paper, because we feel like if we go in with a bunch of newspaper, a bunch of printed out information from the internet, that we're going to be able to get the best deal. And so we concocted this idea of Mr. Kia. And he was this rolled up newspaper, rolled up papers, and he's got these plastic muscle arms and sunglasses because he's cool. And he'd go into the dealership with you, and he'd strong arm the dealer, and he'd make sure you get the best car at the best price. And so it involved things like busting through walls and smashing glass and throwing roofies in some guy's drink, whatever. The guy was unpredictable. And so we concocted like 100 scenarios for this, and this is kind of what it is. This is Creative Avenue. And, so if that's Creative Avenue, what's Business Boulevard? Well, it's the same thing on the business side. It's the part of the project where the business folks are really focusing on a project. And believe it or not, they're really excited about it. Us as creatives kind of feel like we're the only ones who get excited, and the business folks are off, ho-hum. But they actually get really excited about it because they kind of feel like, hey, big brand operator, I've got these great ideas for you. You're going to love them. Perfect strategy. It's going to work great for your product or service. They're thinking, hey, my billings are up. We're going to have a great year. Everybody's, doing American handshakes, which is, a high five for those of you who don't know. And everyone's excited. But the thing is when we're on our respective streets, at a certain point, we're going to intersect. Or we're going to collide, right? And so we got this guy here who's, I think he's in a time machine, the business guy, because he's got a newspaper, and those are pretty much dead. And then, oh, look, there's a creative, and he's crazy. Look, he's on his moped, and I think he's got a piece of pizza there in his hand. And so, anyway, there's this collision, right? And so the intersection of Creative Avenue and Business Boulevard is a meeting or a collision of the two groups. And this could be the first time that design concepts are presented. This could be, rough cut of a video, whatever it may be. And as we know, working in it day to day, is that this intersection sometimes doesn't go very smoothly. And what it can lead to is, disgruntled clients, increased project costs, additional, time on projects, etc. And so before we get into examining these problems, let's first do a little bit of profiling. we don't have the budget to do CSI-style profiling, but we're going to do a little profiling on the creative team and on the business team. So first up is the creatives. And these are the folks that, creatives are kind of big picture, blue sky thinkers. They start with the question of what if, and then they work down that funnel to, in filling out the details. Since the creatives really focus on making commercials, designing websites, et cetera, they have to be very imaginative and conceptual. And so when you're looking at the value that they bring to this equation, obviously we know that they bring incremental revenue because of the web design, et cetera. But really, they're experts at the touchy-feely things, such as connecting with a consumer or connecting with and understanding the consumer experience. And they're really good at those touchy-feely things because they just seem to click. They're thought leaders and idea generators, and through good design or good creative, they're able to lend credibility to a brand, or they're able to speak directly to a target audience. Or on the production end, they're able to find cost-saving efficiencies. A few years ago, I was working on an account with a premium auto brand. And here's an example of how even the small things count, is that we put together a ton of collateral for these guys. It was mostly direct response, but it included all types of stuff. We had a short, limited time frame to get it done. We got it all done, patted ourselves on the back, said, hey, this is great, click print. So a couple months later, we get a phone call from the client, and they're yelling at us. And apparently what happened is that this client, our premium auto brand, offered roadside assistance. And so we created a glove box kit. It sat in the car it sat in the glove box of the brand new car, had all of the manuals, as well as the roadside assistance information. So what happened is this older woman, in the middle of winter, got a flat tire, pulled off to the side of the road, got out, checked, and yep, there's a flat tire. So she boop, 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 dials 1-800 premium auto brand for the auto insurance. Our mistake is that we had branded the 800 number, and we spelled it out alphabetically. Nowhere did it mention the numeric form of that number. So the problem is instead of putting an O, she put a 0. So instead of getting roadside assistance, she got 1-800 party porn. And so she did she was very shocked, and she did that like 1920 silent film thing where she's and fainted. Seriously, she slipped on some ice, threw out her back, had to be taken away in an ambulance, and so the dots were connected, and that's why we had our client on the phone yelling at us. And so you can see that even the small things can make a huge impact. So business folks, who are these guys? Last week I had a chance to see Hamaro Cantu of Moto Restaurant speak. And he was talking about the creative chemistry behind his restaurant. And he has an interesting philosophy, an interesting guiding philosophy. And he said that before you can have a successful creative enterprise, you need to have a successful and profitable enterprise. And that's what the business folks do, and that's what they lend to this equation. They're analytical, they think in very tangible and structured terms. They're left-brained. And that's really good for us as creatives because we're always kind of in this ethereal. We're asking, what if? It's all blue sky. These are the guys who, instead of blue sky, they start with the details and they kind of build the ladder up. So they're able to take ideas when we collaborate with them and actually put some meat around that and put together a plan so that we can actually move it forward and execute against it. I'm always really impressed with the business folks who, since they're experts at client relationships, building client relationships, maintaining client relationships, I've always been really impressed with the account folks who can walk into a room and simultaneously, with a wink and a nod, put the client at ease, build great rapport, and then present and articulate a great marketing plan for a new food product, and they can explain why it's going to be profitable for X, Y, and Z reasons. And that's really the value that they bring to this equation, and it's something that's always impressed me. So why is everybody yelling? Here's a scene. Work is presented, client's upset with it, the account folks are siding with them. Over here, we've got our creatives. They're really fighting for their ideas. They say, hey, we've gone through 2 rounds of revisions here. This work is great. It's perfectly, in sync with what the client's marketing objectives are. It's a saturated marketplace. This will cut through the clutter. And, all teams are kind of fighting for their side, and they're at odds. And so a situation like this, it really just creates a lot of conflict within the agency and external to the agency with the client. And Dean Reich, on his website, The Freelance Pro, he talks about how to deal with these types of situations. And it's really great. Just remember the mnemonic device, ANGER, which is anger, right? It's acknowledge, nod, guide, execute, and retreat. So what we're first going to do in a situation like this is we're going to acknowledge that the other side, that there is a problem between us and the other side. Then we're going to listen, which is the nodding. But it's not just nodding and letting the other person vent. Certainly they're venting. But what we're listening for is this core message, this core nugget, which is identifying the problem. So then we move into a section which is guiding. And in this section, it's where we're able to find some common ground and really collaborate on a solution. And so then the next part, which is executing, that's the easy part. We've identified the problem, so now let's just go fix it, right? We execute against it, and we look like heroes. And so after we've done that, we identified our problem, we fixed the problem, time heals all wounds, right? So let's just retreat, let's back off. And what you can do is actually sometimes between the business teams and the creative teams within a company, or sometimes between the company and the client, it actually strengthens that bond, because what it proves is that in a time of crisis, you're able to collaborate on a solution and then fix it. Oh, no, not again. So how often does this happen? It's delivery day, and the creative concepts, or whatever the ad campaign might be, it doesn't match the brief. So internal, the business folks, the account executives, and whomever, they're very upset, right? And it's a situation where, maybe the client asked for the sun and the moon and a couple stars. They are trying to be reasonable, right? And so what they get is from the creative team is they get a truck and a pony and like this really sweet jump and maybe some flames on the side. And it's not always a situation where the creative said, nah, I'm not listening to the brief, we're doing whatever we want. Sometimes it's that the creative team doesn't quite understand the intent of that communication effort. And so Brian Tenenhouse of the Tenenhouse Project, he talks about on his article, on his website, he's written an article that talks about creating better briefing documents for agencies. And what I really like about what he says is that he says that briefing documents, whether it's creative brief or an internal agency brief, the purpose of them is to provide direction, which is, giving us parameters, taking us down that funnel, and then also inspire brilliant creative. And so what we need to do is involve the creative team up front. We've already decided that we're going to be collaborative. We're looking at creating better briefing documents. And so now let's involve a creative lead, not just the creative director, but a creative lead from the team upstream so that they can understand the intent. Because a lot of times the intent of this communication effort, this is part A. We've got part B next quarter, part C, and this may be a 5-year plan. And so if the creative lead up front can understand the intent, when they go to do their job, when the other creatives on the team go to do their job, they can communicate that and they can make better and more informed decisions. And of course, the goal is that it avoids some headaches down the road. So we talked about a couple, the teams of business teams and creative teams. We've talked about a couple problems. Now I'd like to walk you through a few tips for success. So when we're working with creatives, what we want to do is create a positive work environment. And that could be anything from getting all of the creatives, the traditional model is that the account team sits over here and that the creatives sit over here, and they're all in close proximity, but they're in their little groups. And then there was a kind of reigning thought for a bit, which is, no, we're breaking down all the silos and everybody gets mixed, and we'll assign them to specific account teams. And then we found that, that doesn't work. And what I've found that works really well is when we create a positive work environment is putting all the creatives in close proximity. Some creatives who work on one account and work on a different account can still collaborate on ideas. That's not to say that they don't collaborate with the other people in the company, but creating a positive work environment helps a lot. Business people, create realistic project deadlines and project expectations. Sometimes it's uncomfortable, but that's what we need to do. We need to make sure that we're not promising, that we can do 80 hours worth of work in 2 days. When you're working with creatives, understand that they think in metaphorical terms. They think in visuals. And so make sure that you explain the marketing objectives to them and explain the intent of the communication effort, and then give them business parameters. It's important that when you're working with creatives that, we kind of live in this ethereal world, that you give them business parameters. Sometimes you define the box. So sometimes the box is this big, other times the box is this big. But those parameters help focus the attention. And then within that, they can come up with these really great and innovative ideas. So make sure, this is a big complaint, make sure that you give the creatives a voice. Listen to their opinion, make sure that it is valued. Make sure that they feel like they're part of the team. And, of course, encourage new solutions. We're looking for new and innovative solutions as we move forward, so encourage new solutions. And then, of course, enable and facilitate progress. This is a big one. Either on the client side or internal, don't have too many cooks in the kitchen. Have one or two key decision makers. It's very difficult when you're responsible for outputting something. On the creative end, you're supposed to put together some designs for a new website, or you're putting together a rough cut for a video. And you go down this path, and you have one key decision maker saying, this is the way we're going, and you get to the end of it, and Diane comes in and says, nope, this is all wrong, we got to go this direction. So then you go in the direction of Diane, and then Jason comes over and says, nope, we're wrong, let's go in this direction. All of a sudden, you've spent a lot of time here, you feel like your ideas aren't valued, and it really starts to take an emotional toll. So have one or two key decision makers, both internal to the agency, and of course we can't always control this, but hopefully on the client end, have one or two key decision makers as well. So creative folks, when you're working with business people, here's some things to understand. Try to understand the impact, the larger impact to your agency or your company, and then also understand the larger impact to the client. Oftentimes, we'll get staffed on a piece of new business. We're not familiar with the account, and we say, that's stupid, that's silly, this thing will never work. And it may or may not work, but what we were hired to do is to make this a success. And so with that, let's try to understand what it is they're trying to do. Let it bubble around in your noggin, and then come up with some great ideas for it. Business people don't think in visuals. They don't think in metaphors. They think in very tangible, structured terms. So when you're explaining something, if you need to use a metaphor, that's great. But also explain, if you're using the color blue for a particular brand, make sure that you explain the reasons why. So if you don't want an account manager, if you don't want a project manager coming over every 15 minutes or every 30 minutes and asking, hey, are you done? When you need this 6-hour chunk of time to make the creative process happen, make sure that you proactively communicate progress. If you continually do that, people will it'll build up trust, and then people will say, all right, let's leave these guys alone and let them do their thing because they're always going to hit our deadline. Don't patronize, don't condescend. It doesn't help anyone. On the creative end, we have a very specialized skill set, not only on the creative side of things, but also with software. And so a lot of times the business folks don't quite understand that you're using 8 pieces of software to output this final piece of video or to output this final design for a website. And so what you need to do is understand that and then try to bring things down to a level that everybody can understand. Be open to changes and new ideas. This is a big one because each team, and especially on the creative team, it becomes your responsibility to come up with these new ideas. And what ends up happening is that we start to shut out the rest of the world. And we say, nope, we're in charge of this. We're not going to listen to you, account folks. Listen to your ideas. Be open to these new ideas. Because sometimes it's not that the account folks are trying to do your job for you. It's that they're coming to you with this idea, and they're saying, hey, this may be a different perspective on it. Or they may say, hey, this is a good idea. I think, can you make it into something great? And so, that's really how the, two groups can work really well together. So be open to these new ideas. So what I'd like to leave you with today is a green light list of do's. And this is for both sides. Do trust your counterpart. Do set realistic expectations and deadlines. Do create a positive environment that allows for failure. And let's apply those learnings. That's actually key, is because a lot of companies, they feel like they have to go the safe route or they have to just do something that they've done before because they're afraid to fail. It's important for us to fail. We're always experimenting. We're selling companies, products, and services. And so it's important for us to, while we use our tried and true techniques, it's important for us to tweak those. It's important for us to come up with new techniques. And sometimes they don't work. But as long as we learn from those failures, ultimately we'll be very successful. Do listen to different and good ideas. Create a positive feedback loop, which is really kind of the open door policy. Make sure that we're always collaborating so that if somebody comes to you on the business side or if someone comes to you on the creative end, that we can kind of create this positive feedback loop instead of saying, oh, no, that's a stupid idea, don't think about that. Discuss it. Because sometimes on the business end, they say, nope, the client would hate this. But on the creative end, we need to kind of research some of these ideas to say, what if? And then we'll kind of edit down. So, do foster a spirit of collaboration and do create a positive feedback loop. That's all I've got for you today. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to contact me, brianhouchins@gmail.com, or find me online at www.liquidismedia.com. Thank you.